Introduce myself because I kind of want to tell my story, and that's kind of relevant to how we're approaching this session today. But I grew up on a farm in northwest Missouri, and cared a lot about agriculture. That's where I really started my appreciation for how productive the land can be and how important agriculture is, to the livelihood of everyone. And after that, I went to the University of Missouri to study journalism, where I learned about communications, and then I went and got really interested in science, and so I spent my first part of my career working for the rural electric co-ops, where I became very familiar with energy issues and how important energy is in our society, and also the problems it causes related to pollution and those kinds of decisions that you need to make. And then I spent the rest of my career, about 28 years, managing publications for University of Missouri Extension, and that's where I really connected with a lot of scientists, appreciated the scientific process, and started getting concerned about climate change because I started learning about that. And so as soon as I retired, I decided I wanted to go and volunteer full-time working on climate change because I thought that was the most important issue there was. And my 96-year-old father still lives in the farmhouse that he was born in up in northwest Missouri. My brother farms the farm, and both he and I are seriously concerned about climate change. So with that drew me to Citizens Climate Lobby, where I felt like I could be empowered to do something about it. And I specifically liked the policy that they were advocating for, which is to put a price on carbon and return the funds back to citizens. So that's kind of my story and why I get here and why I'm passionate about why I'm doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and Brian, you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Brian Smith. I am the rural organizer with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. I also head up our legislative work in Jeff City, also at the local level, and we also do some work in Washington, D.C. as well. I've been with the organization since 2013, and the organization's been around since 1985. It formed in response to the original farm foreclosure crisis, in which we worked on keeping farmers on their farm from being illegally foreclosed on. And so over the last 30 plus years, we've grown into working on fighting factory farm agriculture and the vertical integration of our food system. We also weigh in on the Farm Bill, on national trade issues. We oppose the TPP, and also we're avidly watching the changes to NAFTA that are being negotiated. And so it's a wide array of policy things. And so as for me, I started out more on the labor side of things in St. Louis. I'm a St. Louis native. I started volunteering with Jobs with Justice many years ago, working on mainly labor issues, and then got involved in healthcare work when the ACA was first being brought in. And I also worked for United Healthcare, so I saw the other side of that as well. And so that got me involved in healthcare work. I was the first healthcare organizer for MRCC, and I was followed by the awesome Martha Stevens and now Dina. And so, and then I just evolved into working on factory farm issues for the organization. And I'm glad to be here today.
Good. Yeah, thank you. My name is Martha Stevens. Currently I'm a representative here in Columbia in the 46th District. I just finished my first term and running for re-election this November. But prior to being an elected official, my background is in social work. So I did that for almost 10 years, worked for different non-for-profits, Missouri Rural Crisis Center being one of them, doing work on healthcare advocacy, especially for rural areas and Medicaid expansion. But before MRCC, did work for non-for-profits that supported programming for low-income seniors and adults with disabilities to age in place and in our communities. So that's an issue that's really important to me. But had the opportunity before I ran for office to do community organizing around women's healthcare issues, and then later with Medicaid expansion. That was my last job before I ran for office. So I have the perspective of being an advocate and a community organizer and bringing folks down to Jefferson City. And now I'm I'm a state rep, and so I have the opportunity to continue to work with those stakeholders, but now I have the ability to use my position to file legislation and really try to get other colleagues of mine on board with different policy ideas. Most of my work has been around different healthcare issues, something that's kind of very my wheelhouse, but also very passionate about, and I think it's a critical issue in every community in Missouri. So I am excited to hope to continue to do that work and work with advocates, and look forward to today's discussion.
So my name is Robin Shelp, and advocacy was never on my radar, never. In fact, government politics I was the uninformed voter for a long time. But so a little background, I am a teacher by trade, a middle school teacher turned homeschool teacher, and I have a wonderful husband and 3 boys, ages 12, 11, and 8. My 11-year-old was born with a genetic disorder and has a lot of delays. So when he was it was 2012, when he was almost 5, we moved to Columbia from rural Missouri because there's nothing for people with disabilities services in rural Missouri that are affordable. So we came here to get some services. And not a big deal, but 2 years ago, a friend who's an occupational therapist on Facebook posted about this legislative forum that was going to be happening for OTs and PTs. And I thought, I have a question I have been dying to ask. I'm going to go. So I went. It was at this Mexican restaurant, and they had this long discussion on Medicaid, Medicare, that kind of thing. And finally I said, I have a question. And I said, in 2010, Missouri legislature passed the autism bill, which required insurance to cover therapy for children with autism, or anything on the autism spectrum disorder. Autism makes up half of the children with developmental disabilities. And I said, and that's wonderful, but there's the other half. There are children with Down syndrome and CP and Fragile X and all the other genetic disorders that didn't get covered. First, can you tell me why this was passed to only cover half the kids? And secondly, what can we do to change it? That question changed everything for me, because from there, afterwards, Representative Stevens came up and said, let's talk, let's have a conversation. And that just kind of spiraled into Representative Basie taking on that legislation and filing it. And I would go to the Capitol once a week with my children, and we would go from office to office passing out notes about it, talking to people. It didn't get very far the first year, but the second year we came back with a much better bill. And we came back with numbers to prove why this was important. And every week, my boys and I went to the Capitol and spent Wednesdays at the Capitol, and we went to the offices, and ended up last year, that bill made it through the House as an amendment. So that's a lot of progress. We were really excited. And in doing this, though, and getting to meet people, more concerns came up, and people would come to me with issues like, can we also take on this, and can we deal with this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. That's not what I do. I'm a homeschool mom. But in talking to their advocates, we finally decided we need to do something, and we need to form an advocacy group. So this summer we got together. It was funny. I applied to be on the Disability Commission, and I got a rejection letter. And I was so bummed, and I told these ladies, I just want to make a change. And they're like, let's make a change. Let's form our own group. And we did. So we created Missouri Disability Empowerment. I have papers in the back, so you'll have to grab it. And we've already done some neat things. We've got some legislation we're working on in addition to the insurance legislation. And our goal is to empower people with disabilities through grassroots advocacy and by promoting inclusivity. Because my dream for my son and for all people with disabilities, and for all people who don't have disabilities, is that we live in an inclusive world. And we have a long ways to get there. So that's me.
I'm Mike Hoy. I just retired at the end of May from the Missouri Catholic Conference. My passion for progressive issues started pretty young. My heroes were people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy. And when we were first married after college, we went out to a little town in Colorado, southern Colorado, Walsenburg, very poor area, and saw a lot of poverty. It was kind of a Catholic Peace Corps program. And when I finally came back to Missouri after about 3 years, I wanted to kind of try to do some advocacy. And so the Catholic Conference had a pretty broad agenda. And so I got involved, and I worked there, and I ended up the executive director the last 8 years or so of my career. It's sort of ironic you're talking about factory farms. When I first came to the conference, one of the main issues I worked on was family farm issues. I vividly remember the family farm crisis. We put together material on that, tried to organize farmers, and tried to pass legislation. So that's my dad was a conservation agent and then a fishery biologist, so environmental issues and family farm issues have always been close to my heart. So those are some areas that I've been involved in. And then later I got involved in the healthcare issues and Medicaid expansion. And the story you just told is a great story, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we try to do at the conference. We try to find people that have had an experience that shows the problem in a particular law, and then invite them to come to the Capitol. So sometimes as a lobbyist, I was a registered lobbyist since 1986, sometimes I would testify and I'd be there, and you got to count the votes. As an Irish Catholic, I understand that. You got to count the votes. You want to pass the bill, you got to count the votes. People forget that. But before you do that, you got to lay the groundwork by educating people. And legislators, I think, get tired of lobbyists all the time. If you can bring in people that are actually experiencing the issue and can really talk about it, that's a very powerful witness. And my wife's an early special education teacher and learning center in Jefferson City, so those issues have also been an area we've been very involved in. So I'm glad to be here.
Question, can you give an example of when a lobby visit with a lawmaker or staff successfully moved them on an issue? Tell us what you felt made it a successful encounter. And Representative Stevens, I'll probably have you talk about when you've been on the receiving end of that. We'll let the others go first.
Sure,
so,
first.
Brian, do you have an example there?
Oh, I'm going now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, we've, in terms of, agriculture issues at the Capitol, a lot of times you're faced with, there are very few good bills that have come forward in the last several years. And in fact, Representative Stevens brought one last year that was good, and also a Republican colleague of hers. But mostly, we're confronted with either needing to change a bill or sometimes kill bills. And we've been able to cultivate over the years relationships with Republican, mainly state senators that are capable of doing either or both. And one case was in terms of a certain bill was offered a few years ago that was just terrible in every way, or actually it was last year. And through working with actually it was a certain Republican legislator from Jefferson City, also a state senator from Kansas City, we were able to get changes made to it where it still wasn't great, but it was definitely not as horrid as it was first offered. So while that's kind of a cold comfort where you still kind of lost some ground there, it was movement on an issue. Now, in terms of killing bills, over the last several years, there's been a Republican state senator who's been very effective with that for us. When negotiation is not even offered by bill sponsors, as often is the case, this senator was very effective at not only stopping bills in their tracks, or a common tactic that's used is was looked at as a controversial bill will very often be held back until the last week or two of session and then added to what are called omnibus bills. And omnibus bills are probably the worst form of public policy you're ever going to see, because it's basically a place where bad bills go to get passed. They'll take one popular piece of legislation and surround it with a bunch of losers that are being fought, for good reason on several fronts, and then they'll throw it out there the second or third to last day. They'll turn a 10-page bill into a 200-page bill, and legislators on the floor, as Representative Stevens can tell you, there's just not enough time in the day to read what is in all of these bills. And so this senator that I'm talking about was very effective at going to that omnibus bill sponsor saying, if you don't take these pieces off, I will filibuster it until it dies. And so he was, so that also worked. But the big driving force has always been citizen involvement. As Mike very correctly said, they get very tired of seeing us, lobby them. And bringing people who can come and sit before them and say, this bill negatively impacts me and my family for these reasons, or this bill negatively impacts my community for these reasons, is what moves a senator like the one who was so much help to us, to be as helpful to us as he has been, as he was over the years.
Okay, we'll step over you as representative and go to Robin.
So I don't have the experience that these guys have, and I only had one bill that I had to watch, which made my job a lot easier. So I don't really, because it was brand new, and it was something most didn't know anything about, there wasn't a whole lot of changing, and I was just a mom, so they weren't going to lay their cards on the table. We got the nod, you have cute kids, thanks for coming, that kind of thing. But I did have a couple say, well, we don't like one especially, I don't like mandates, but this is important. This needs to happen. So we had some of that, but where I thought, it's a little different than the question, but you asked where we changed a perception. So in our first year there, my son needs support in the restroom. And if you've been to the Capitol, the restrooms are gorgeous, but they have men's bathrooms and women's bathrooms. And the handicap stalls are not huge. And my son is, he's 11 now, so he'd have to go with me. And so I'd go with a friend whose son was, I think he's 7 now, and he needed to be changed. And there just wasn't a place to do that. And so I wrote to the Office of OA, and Martha sent a letter to them also, and they called us. I sent some pictures and said, your bathrooms, because of the bathrooms you're building, is not fully accessible to all Missourians. And they called me back saying, we're going to put a fully accessible family restroom in the basement. And so now there's a family restroom in the basement with an adult-sized changing table. And that was the first time I thought, oh my goodness, we can make a change. People are listening. And so that was, for me, that was the exciting time. Another instance I had, we had something going on locally, and it just didn't seem right. But it doesn't work to just go in and say it just doesn't seem right. So we studied our laws, and we took the laws and said, the kids that need to get service aren't getting services, and this is where the law supports us. We need to see a change, and it happened. And so it's just proof that if we do our homework and we know what we're doing and come at it the right way, we maybe can affect change as just parents or just citizens, or we shouldn't say just, but that's how I felt, and I realized there's more to it.
Thank you. Mike Parker, and reflect on that a little bit too. But go.
Yeah, really for a number of years now, it's been a real challenge in the General Assembly, and there have been a lot of bills pushed forward that really can hurt people. Sometimes you can kill those bills, and sometimes you can't. And sometimes you make strategic judgments, which may be wrong or may be right. There was a welfare reform bill a few years ago, and the Catholic Conference, we made the assessment, it's going to pass. There's no way you're going to defeat this bill. And they did pass it. But before they passed it, we were able to add some things to the bill. I went into the sponsor of the bill, who's very pro-life. Of course, we're pro-life. And I said, well, don't you think the clients should see the social worker, see a human being, before you just cut them off to TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families? And don't you think there needs to be more work training and some other questions? And he kind of modified his bill and acknowledged that, and the bill was improved. It still was not a good bill, but it was better than it was before. And I think what we try to do, and I think it's an effective thing, is try to find out in your opponent the argument that they're using that they don't even believe. Because there's things there, probably kind of talking points, that if you really probe them on it, they don't really believe it deep down inside. Like on Medicaid, the way we tried to argue on Medicaid expansion is we would bring examples of women and men that were working and were being cut off Medicaid. And we would talk particularly to Republicans and say, okay, you believe in the work ethic. We do too. That's great. But just because they're working in a kind of job that doesn't offer health insurance, do you think that's really right? Don't you think that if you're working, you ought to be eligible for affordable health care? You believe in work? This is a part of believing in work. And so that would work to a degree, and we were able to get some inroads, but we were not able to totally expand Medicaid, but we're able to do a few things. So that's one thing we've always tried to do, is find out something and try to understand the point of view of the opponents, and then really think about it, and then try to see what they really don't believe themselves in their own argument, and really talk to them about it and dialogue with them. And of course, citizen involvement is just huge, but on some of these issues, you almost have to appeal just directly to them.
Representative Stevens, you might reflect on what's influenced you, on it, made you change your position on something in the past, and also I think it'd be interesting if you comment on. I think a lot of people feel that their representatives don't listen to them, and that they're influenced by somebody other than their constituents. So you might talk to us a little bit about the balance between what you hear from constituents versus professional lobbyists and special interests.
Sure. So I'm trying to think where I want to begin on this. I can't think offhand of a specific vote where someone came and lobbied me on something. A lot of times, what's happened is I've done my research, people have come to me, but maybe not so much in terms of a specific vote, but I've definitely had advocates and everyday citizens come to me with ideas about legislation. It's happened a lot with Robin and other advocates that she works with. But I've definitely been moved by citizens that have come to me with good information about, one example is a bill I filed to decriminalize needle exchange programs, which really is a harm reduction effort. A lot of other conservative states have done it, and it's definitely a problem when we're trying to reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis C in light of the opiate epidemic. And so I had advocates come to me. It's something that I did know about, but I hadn't researched in a number of years since grad school, and it was really compelling to hear why, see the data that they presented to me about specific to Missouri, but also have advocates there, people that were recovering from addiction. So to hear their personal stories too and how it related to their lives. So I didn't file it the first year. So the first year I talked with advocates over the course of a little over a year. And then the second year I was in office, that's legislation that I decided that I was going to put my name on and really advocate for and push along. And we did actually pass it out of the House. It wasn't my language, it was a colleague of mine, Representative Holly Raiders, but we worked together on that. It didn't make it past the Senate though, so hopefully next year we can push on with that. But another issue that really came to me from everyday citizens, and of course I am familiar with MRCC before I ran for office, but having the farmers, because they're a citizens-based organization, they're member-based. So to hear directly from farmers that would come down to Jefferson City and talk to legislators and myself about the importance of sustainable agriculture and not letting foreign corporations buy Missouri farmland. That was something that moved me, and in the second year in office, I took that on and filed that, and also worked across the aisle and found a Republican colleague to help push that along too, because in the super minority, it's strategic and wise to try to find Republicans on the other side that are willing to work with you on an issue. It really helps with the progress of a bill. So yeah, I think what I really want to emphasize to people that are here today is just, I really think, I see policymaking as many stakeholders at the table trying to make the best decision and write the best bills. And you guys are part of those stakeholders. It's so important for people to join organizations that are tracking issues you care about, that can keep you up to date on where bills are, when you can come testify. As someone that has sat on committees for the past 2 years, I would agree that I would much rather hear from everyday citizens than the lobbyists that will testify on, a bunch of different bills, because it's important to hear firsthand from people about how a bill is either going to help or hurt families and communities. We work for you. I think, unfortunately, there's some people in Jeff City that mindset has left them a little bit. But we work for you, and I think that's really important for you guys to remember when you go down to Jefferson City and you want to talk to your lawmakers. And I think part of it too is, when things don't work out and a bill or an agenda item isn't working, it's also really important for people to get involved in electoral politics. And really, find candidates that align with your values and that are going to support the issues that you care about.
So the next question is, do you feel the passion you bring to the issue is a benefit or a disadvantage? And I think we've been hearing a lot of, when we got up and introduced ourselves, we told a little bit about our stories, and so when we go to, I do most of my lobbying in Washington, D.C. with House and Senate there, but one of the things we do a lot of is we tell our stories. We encourage people that, so that our representatives know where we're coming for and why we're passionate about the issue. So I thought, Brian, you want to talk about how your passion works for you or against you? Obviously, you can get a little bit too passionate about something that can backfire too. So anyway, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, sure. I am very mindful of trying to keep my passion directed in productive ways, because working at the State House, it can be tempting, at times to, in certain hearings and talking to certain legislators, to let your passions lead you, while cathartic, not a productive expression. So I'm very mindful of that. And the main thing I do is I try to keep our farmers involved throughout the session. The last few years, we've started our first lobby day the first week of session, before bills are really being assigned to committees or being moved, just to let them know we're there, we're watching, we're aware of what's already been filed and what we're concerned about, and just progress that through the session. Now, in terms of passion, for me, I think it's a positive force, and it gets reinforced, by our farmer members all the time. I'm constantly reminded of why I'm going down there, why I am testifying at times in front of hostile committees, and one tactic, for organizations, if you are going to a committee to express a point of view that flies in the face of several key members of that committee, one thing I try to do is, before exposing citizen members to some of that wrath, I tend to go first and let them kind of go after me a little bit, get that out of their system, and then have more productive exchanges, with our farmers and people that we've brought to Jefferson City, so they have a good experience there. Because, in the House Ag Committee, it gets a little testy sometimes, and we don't want our members. I once saw someone testify. This was, I think, before Martha was on the committee. Someone came and testified for the first time on one of our bills that we were working, and they actually, brought her to tears. And so it's important to kind of do some of that pre-work and try and set the tone, so it's at least a productive experience where, even if they don't agree, it stays civil. And so, I would say, passion is a definite positive force for me, and it's always being reinforced by our members.
Sure. Actually, I really agree with what Brian just said. I think that, I wouldn't be in office and run for office and trying to work on a number of different issues I care about if I wasn't really passionate. And it's really what drives me, trying to work on policy that's going to lift up communities, try to work on issues around social and economic justice. And those are my passions. That's what, the work that I've done over the years has always been about, at the core of it.
So I think my passion's pretty obvious. I take it with me when I go, and I bring the boys in, and we tell our story. And this is my child's future. Of course, this is something I'm passionate about. But the first year, I really thought That's all it would take, was the passion. Making people realize you understand that only half the kids are being covered, and this is wrong. This is discrimination. This is wrong. That wasn't enough. Passion isn't enough. And it depends on whose office you go to. With some of them, I keep the passion short and I go heavy on my numbers. We had to come up with the numbers and prove that this isn't going to cost a lot. This is good economics for our state and the long-term savings, all that kind of thing. And I remember I was in the minority chair for the insurance committee's office doing my little spiel, and I did the passion part, and then I'm like, now let me tell you about the numbers. He's like, I don't care about the numbers. This is wrong. It needs to happen. And I'm like, really? But I have numbers. Because we really did focus on the people that we didn't think we had their votes, because it's all about the votes. And they wanted to know the numbers. And so you really have to balance the passion with the reality of what this is.
When I think of passion, I kind of remember my early years when I was very passionate. I'm still passionate, but something I learned from the people I worked with is take your passion and move it into hard work. I mean, it's hard work to pass a bill. The process is set up so that bills do not pass. The general default is they're not going to pass. Most bills don't pass. And in Missouri, it's even more difficult because they can filibuster in the Senate and kill bills. If it's a priority bill they don't like and 3 or 4 or 5 senators don't like it, it's probably not going to pass. So you take that passion and you work to mobilize citizens, and you get a good, clear message, and that's how you can start. I guess the other thing I'd say about passion is you can be passionate about an issue, and you need to be clear about your large principles that you're advocating for, but you shouldn't let your passion blind you to listening to your opponents. They may have some points that you've overlooked. If you're going to have a democracy, you're going to compromise. You've got to compromise. You've got to listen to other people. You're not going to get everything you want. And so you've got to take that into account. So you get your citizens mobilized, but then in the building, when you're lobbying, either as an individual citizen or as a lobbyist or whatever, you've got to respect the other point of view. You've got to listen, and then you've got to try to address their concerns. So it's a way of taking that passion and calming it down and directing it in a constructive fashion. I mean, we can all get angry sometimes, or passionate, or whatever you want to call it, but you're right, it doesn't do much good unless you take that and put it into a constructive plan for how you're going to move forward and try to affect public policy.
Yeah, perfect. I was going to suggest that the problem is when people get so passionate they don't listen.
Right.
When you go into a lobby meeting, whenever you leave the lobby meeting, if you felt like the representative did all the talking, that's probably okay. That you did some listening. And they'll probably remember that meeting as a meeting that was productive because they were talking. They don't think about it that way, but it's really important to listen to the legislators.
Something like Rebecca said, asking the right question is a real powerful start sometimes to a whole process.
Right. And you can do that better if you listen to and know where they're coming from.
Right.
And you should know where your legislator is coming from before you walk in the office.
Yeah.
We do a tremendous amount of work prior to the meeting, to know where they're coming from and what they've done in advance. So at this point, I'm going to just look around the audience. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask right now? Please come to the front and use the microphone so that we can catch it on the recording.
Hi, my name's Barbara Beauchard, and in lobbying and in legislation, I'm going to go back to Proposition A that was pretty soundly defeated just recently, but we keep seeing statements that it's going to be reintroduced and the legislature's going to pass it again, and then what do people do, or how do we spoke, a lot of us spoke anyway, and now what?
Well, I would say that you hold those folks accountable. We are going into an election year. Every House seat is up for re-election. So I think a lot of it comes down to electoral politics. And so, I mean, finding candidates that you can support, that, we're on the right, well, whatever position you might think was the right side, I think we sent a strong message to elected officials. So I'm hopeful that that's something that we can continue to fight against, knowing that nearly 70% of Missourians said no to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you don't have to make your opponents the enemy. They can be good people, but you can decide their policies aren't necessarily productive, and you need to put someone else in that office. I mean, most policies take place through the legislature, and then once in a while you'll have these initiative petitions. So if you're concerned about something like right to work and you think you put it to bed, well, not completely, And that would be the case on a number of other issues. You've got to put people into those chairs that reflect the kind of policies that you want to promote.
Hi, yeah, please help me get a little bit less of or more of a fine-tuned view, because I know this is a sweeping generalization, but my perception of the Republican supermajority is that they are just so focused on cutting taxes and doing their part, at the state level, as is happening at the federal level, to do that and to just keep on with the greatest transfer of wealth, in all of human history, and at the same time that they're cutting the funding that we, the people, pool our resources and need to have and use to have schools and universities and state parks and health and senior services and a healthy agriculture and conservation and waste management and environmental quality and public safety and public libraries and roads and bridges and healthcare and energy and economic development. And they just write all that off as being, socialism and paid for with their precious taxes. And it's not that bad, is it?
Anybody want to take that?
I'll start off. Fools dare to tread. Where do you start? There's a different philosophy. There's different political philosophies. Okay. And the philosophy of conservatives, which we do a lot of dialoguing with, obviously, on social justice issues, is a lot of faith in the market, too much faith in the market. I've learned over the years to respect those arguments. I mean, I'm not a quote socialist, so to speak. I believe in free markets. But they have to be regulated. And the same tension goes with this whole revenue issue. And people have different opinions about that. If you're going to have public services, you got to pay for them. And but people, some folks want to be for tax cuts because that's popular. But at some point, you don't have enough revenue coming in to fund the programs that people really need, your local public schools, for instance. And I've always, they've been cutting taxes in various ways for quite a while now, through tax credits, tax deductions, and just plain old tax cuts. I think it's beginning to catch up, and the impact's starting to be felt and realized among people. And when that happens, then people are going to start making the connection that, well, no, we don't need another tax cut. We need the revenue to do some of these programs. But it's making those connections. Because, you know, one of the things they like to say is, well, there's so much waste, there's so much waste. Well, these legislators that are on these budget committees, you're not on a budget committee, I don't think. They work long, long, long hours. And they make these programs as efficient as they can. And I guess the last thing I'd say is the rhetoric of tax cuts doesn't reflect necessarily the deeper opinion of a lot of legislators. They want programs that are well funded, but they don't want too much taxes. So there's sort of a balance there. But it's popular to say you're for tax cuts in a lot of rural districts, for example. And so it makes it politically tough for some of them, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, and I would say there has been a real trend to further cut taxes. I've been pretty frustrated that we continue to do that in Jeff City when we do have programs that we cut. The first year I was down there, one of the first programs that was on the chopping block because of the budget shortfall was in-home services for low-income seniors and adults with disabilities. We cut the MORX program. That's a program that assists low-income seniors to pay for their prescriptions. 60,000 people were bumped off that. And so the fact that that's the first place that we look when we're going to cut programs is really disappointing and sad to me, and has a real life impact on people. And so I think we need to have I know it's not popular for people to talk about raising taxes, but we also have an obligation to fund programs that we all utilize. And I think that that's an important thing to go back to. And I think we need to have more conversations about increased revenue in our state. That's something I haven't seen a whole lot of in the past 2 years. And I also think that we need to reevaluate our tax credits. We give out approximately $500,000, I think now I can't remember the number offhand, but we get away a lot of money in tax credits every year, and we don't really audit those programs and how well they're doing, and I think that it would be more responsible if we took a hard look at that and audited those allocations as well. And I apologize, I can't remember the number offhand right now.
So I'm going to speak to this just briefly. I don't know a lot on it. I'm the lone conservative probably in the room, other than my family. But it puts me in a unique position because I'm fighting for disability stuff, and that doesn't tend to be a conservative issue. But I've gotten to get close to a lot of the local representatives who are conservative, and to build that relationship and say, okay, let's have a heart-to-heart talk on what this really does. Mm-hmm. This is a real person. It's not just a line item. Mm-hmm. And I know there was a tax credit that they tried to pass a year ago, and it was supposed to help kids with disabilities with the schools. It was a huge credit. And I sat down and I said, I know this looks good and it's a credit, but let me tell you how it's not going to help these kiddos, because this is not going to help my son, and this is actually going to put these kids at a disadvantage, and the only ones it's going to help are these ones, and that's not your goal. So if you pass this, please don't think this is what it's going to really be. And the representative that was on that committee voted against it. He went against party lines because it was like, oh wait, I didn't realize, it sounds good, it's not what it really is. So I really think that relationship, going to them and sitting down and not coming and attacking, why are you cutting, but hey, let's talk about one issue, and really talking to them about it.
Yeah, I think what happens in the budget committee is people are very conscientious. They work long, long hours, but global decisions are made about like a tax cut or something, and then they've got this pizza, and it's only this big, and they have to make these tough decisions, and so they're always, some people are getting cut to protect other people. People start fighting against each other, It's like everybody's got their knife under the table smiling, but, they want their part of the budget for sure to get that. But it's because the pizza has become so small and the revenue is not adequate that you have all these battle royals in these budget committees. But the actual budget committees work really hard, long hours, to try to do a budget that's a good budget, but they're working under the constraints not only of decisions maybe they made during the last year, but decisions that have been made about taxes and revenue 10 years ago that are affecting how much revenue the state of Missouri has. And so they're working in a very difficult situation. That's the point I want to make.
Well, just a few minutes left, but please. I may have missed it if I stepped out, but what is the most valuable thing that a citizen can do with their time? So if it's a lobby day where you're seeing hundreds of people in a day, or is it individually making an appointment with their legislator to have a one-on-one conversation? Is it writing to them? Is it calling them? Like, what is the way that we get your ear? And I guess that's more directed at Martha, but.
Well, I think it's a number of things. And every legislator is a little different in how they communicate, but I don't think there's like one specific thing, and I think it's unique to each legislator. I think something that's really important is to build a relationship with your legislator. Like even in the interim, when we're not down in Jefferson City, when people are back in the community, in their hometowns, I think that's really important to build that relationship with folks and get to know them. But I think it's a whole host of things. I mean, it's if you are this is your first time like really getting involved in local politics, I think a good entryway into it is finding an organization that already has the infrastructure set up so that they can, like I said earlier, kind of plug you in, tell you when there's a lobby day. It will be more organized. They'll have materials for you and training, or they should. A good organization should do that. And so I think that's important. And then you're also building that base of that issue through that organization or through something that you create on your own that maybe isn't a formal not-for-profit or what have you. And so, letter writing, emails, phone calls, I think all of it, holding folks accountable, you writing letters to the editor about an experience on an issue with the legislator that you had and things like that. I think that it's really many different tactics that can be used. But I really do think that trying to plug yourself into an infrastructure that already exists is a good way to get involved. And you'll meet other organizations doing other work that might spark a passion for you on another policy issue.
And we're looking for people to join our group. But another neat way that my son and I got involved is volunteering for their campaigns. Find someone you agree with, and you get to know them, and they get to know you, and then you can talk to them. We were in a parade for, we went to a little talking thing with Eric Schmidt when he was running for state treasurer. Then the next couple days later, they invited us to be in the parade with him and walk for him in the parade, and he's one of the first people that sat down and talked to us about this legislation, and he got a senator who does not support this legislation to actually get it drafted for us. So he pulled the strings there.
I like to answer, weigh in just a little bit on that. And I do think joining organizations is really important because what I've learned is not everybody wants to make a phone call, not everybody wants to write a letter, not everybody wants to go to the State House or the Congress and to lobby. So what the nice thing about organizations is that they usually have several things that need to be done. And so there's usually a place for about anybody in an organization and tasks that need to be done, and then they can give you the guidance as to when certain campaigns are effective. Usually, it's more effective to have a group of people doing something than just a single letter coming in. So if you get a lot of letters on a topic, especially we hear this in D.C., is if they get a certain number of letters coming in, that makes the agenda of the staff meeting that week. For example. So what our organization does is we plan these campaigns. It's not always a writing campaign or a phoning campaign, so it's they decide on what time it is and what the schedule is and everything and what's going to work best, and the really important thing is to ask people to do what they will do, and so don't ask somebody to make a phone call if they're more comfortable writing an email, so everything works, and I think if we had just one thing we try, it's not going to be as effective as a multi-front approach to them. Is that correct? Mm-hmm.
Well, we're out of time.
Oh, we've got a few minutes.
I got introduced to the legislature with Brian this year at a committee hearing of what I would call a hostile committee hearing. And what I'm wondering is, the feeling I get is, well, this is so pointless. Why bother going to these committee hearings? So I'd like to know about is it ridiculous to waste our time doing that, or is there something more effective? Like, would it be better to go meet each one of these people on the committee prior to making your statement, or is there anything to make that not be so frustrating?
Okay. I'll just jump right in here. Yeah, I got you into it. So it is very important to do, even though sometimes you may feel like you're talking to a brick wall at times. And the reason that is because when you testify before a committee, there are members on that committee that they may not ask you any questions. They may poker face you. They may not even be there. They may be, like in the case of some Democrats, they're spread so thin, they could be on a different committee that day. But having your testimony there, giving it, turning it in, being on record. I have talked to legislators later in session when things are showing up on omnibus bills, and they will go back and look at, oh, this was heard in committee, and they want to see who testified in favor of it, who testified against it, and why. And that has, we have gained allies late on issues where they've gone and seen, oh yeah, this had a lot of resistance. And it will influence votes on committee. A unanimous vote on committee is tough to stop on the floor. A 6-5 vote, they may not even bring it to the floor, even if it went that way. So showing up and testifying is important, even if you get a rude question, even if you get some eye rolling, or even if you just get someone who looks like, they look like they're about to fall asleep. It does register, it does count for something.
Yeah. And I just want to add on to that real quick. And I've seen too, there are like 1,000 bills filed every year. So it's, again, I want to emphasize how important it is for you guys to be advocating for the issues you care about. And when you go talk to folks, like, you're going to be the expert in the room on that issue. That being said, I also, we rely on you guys as organizations and individuals to tell us your perspective, because it gives us also additional information that we can use on the House floor. Like during floor debates, I've seen and heard people bring up testimony that was from committee, and that can be really powerful and captivating, especially if it's a personal story. And so it really is important, and I think we can try to lift up your voice during floor debate too.
I think our time's about up, and that's all the questions. I just she says stop, so I'm just about stop. And just the final thing I'd like to say is, it doesn't matter whether it's in the State House or in Washington, D.C., your legislators really do want to hear from you. And I think a lot of people think that, especially in D.C., that the special interests are controlling everything. But legislators really do want to hear from constituents. So this is really important, to get involved, learn about issues, call your representatives, try to get forming these relationships. It's all about relationships. We've been working on a climate bill for 5 years, okay? But we've built relationships with over 1,000 people on the Hill twice a year. And we've got a lot of relationships built, and we can have conversations real quick. We know who the people are. They know who we are. Whenever the bill comes up, that we can make things happen and have some influence. So, but connect with them.